So hello everyone and welcome to today's session. We're going to be looking at some speaking common questions for part one. So the only part of the speaking test that actually has common questions is part one. And there's a number of topics that always come up and they're right at the beginning of your exam. So it's really important that you know how to answer them, you feel comfortable with them. And that means you go into your speaking exam and you're not going to worry. The first part, you shouldn't even, it should be super easy for you because you know what's coming up. You should be able to answer all of these questions. Nothing should be really much of a surprise. So let me get my chat so I can see what everyone is saying. Can you tell me what are the common introductory part one questions? What topics? So Navina was saying hometown. Yep. Revan says job. When you get asked about job, you normally have a choice. It's job or something else, because not everyone works. Yeah, basically they say, do you work or are you studying? So if you're a student, they're going to ask you questions about study. If you're working, they'll ask you questions about your work. And then the other options are hometown. Can you think of another common topic that might come up? I'm going to give you 5 topics that might come up. So your excellent, well done, Dodi. Yeah, your house. So they quite often say, do you live in a house or an apartment? And the other one you might get is about your neighborhood. So again, all very, very similar topics, very similar questions. So we can have a look at that. Revan mentioned about personal interests like music and hobby. So that's definitely going to come up in task 1, but they tend to be like the second or third category that they ask you about. So we're not sure which one of those are going to come up. Certainly some personal interests are likely to be in there. But to start with, it's going to be work, study, hometown. Do you live in a house or an apartment? Or tell me about your neighborhood. So the most common one that's going to come up, I think, is the work and study. So here are some typical questions you get here. The examiner is normally asked to ask you around 4 questions for each. Sometimes the students are speaking, really developing their answers. You won't get 4 questions, and that will give you slightly less questions. It's the examiner's job to decide how many questions they're going to ask you. The examiner is asked to manage time. You might find that the examiner interrupts you. If the examiner interrupts you while you're speaking, don't panic. It's not a bad thing. It's just the fact that they are asked to manage time. And then if they've decided you've been speaking a lot, unfortunately, the way they go about it is they will interrupt you in the middle of your sentence. This can really throw a couple of students, but if it happens to you, don't worry. It just means the examiner is happy with what you've said and they want to move on to the next question because they're running out of time. And they do actually have to ask a certain amount of questions from each category. Okay, so this first one, actually, I'm going to check. We've got 3 people here today. We've got Revin, Duri, and Nabila. Guys, are you all working? Do some of you study? She's a housewife. Nabila's both. Revin is currently focusing on study. So brilliant. So we can have a look at both of these. If you are in the categories, let's say at the moment you're unemployed. Let's say at the moment you're just focusing on studying. So rather than going, oh no, what do you do for work? I'm a housewife. You can mention I'm a housewife, but you can also say, but I'm studying IELTS. So all of you are studying something. So you can all address the subject of studying. You're all studying IELTS. So if you come up with this question, you're a bit worried. I don't know. I'm not working at the moment. I'm not really a student. I'm not at university. You can still talk about studying because you're studying for your IELTS. This is something you can look at. So what we have to remember with the speaking part of the exam is this is an English test. It is not an ideas test. It's probably the only test you're ever going to take in your life that the examiner really doesn't care if you get a question right or wrong or about your ideas. They care about your English. So we've got to really be thinking about what is it? What are the questions really asking? So let's have a look at this first one we've got for work. How long have you been doing this job? So obviously, you could say how long you've been working. What's the question really testing? Because the examiner doesn't care how long you've been doing your job. You could say, I started today. You could say, I've been doing this job all my life. Both those answers get exactly the same amount of points. What is this question actually testing? Very excellent. Yeah, Dury says it's testing the perfect tense, or the present perfect continuous. We look at this and we say, how long have you been doing? The examiner, when they ask you this, is saying, can this student use the present perfect continuous? This is what I want you to be thinking about when you get asked questions. Don't be going, I can't remember. Like, this is a terrible thing that a lot of people do. They're like, oh, I have to give the right answer. Like I said, if you said, I've been doing this job for 1 day, or I've been doing this job for 100 years, doesn't matter, you're going to get exactly the same points. However, if you said, oh, I've been doing this job, let me think, oh, I can't remember now. Suddenly you're hesitating. Now you're losing marks. So don't hesitate, give the first answer that comes to mind. There's a common one about your hometown. It says, what is the oldest place in your hometown? And almost every student I ask this question to, they go, and they hesitate and think. You do not get marks for getting it right. The examiner probably doesn't know the oldest place in your hometown. You can say, my house is the oldest place in my hometown. If you do it without hesitation, good. If you do it with hesitation, bad. But don't hesitate. First answer that comes to mind, and try and think what they're trying to ask you, because all these questions are very specifically asking you about something. Okay, so here we want the present perfect continuous. What is the most challenging part of your job? So obviously this is going to be up to you. You know your job, but what is the question really asking you? Now, being excellent is asking you about a superlative, the most challenging part that we're using. And yeah, Dury said present tense. So we're stating a fact. So we're going to use present tense to state a fact. And the most challenging is asking you for a superlative. This is what the examiner is listening for. The examiner is not listening for the most challenging part of your job. The examiner has turned off by this point. You know, if you have an annoying friend and they're talking to you, and you normally develop an ability to go, and you're not really listening to them. The examiner is doing that a lot of the time because they're focusing on very, very specific things. They're not really focusing on your answer that much, like the facts. They're focusing on the language. But this is really important. Do you get enough time off? What is this testing? People says, yeah, present simple, present tense, yeah, excellent. So Dury, excellent. Also, yeah, it's talking get enough time off, get time off. So phrasal verbs, it's testing you. It's also testing you, can you use the expression enough? That enough or too much or not enough, that they're looking for these kind of phrases. What should you do if you get a question that says, do you? Raven says, I do, or I don't. Or Nabila says, yeah, yes or no. This is a yes or no question. So either, yeah, I do have enough time off, I don't have enough time off, or yes, Yes, I do. No, I don't. So this is a do you question. You should be able to answer these. Yeah. You can often replicate what's being given to you. So do you, can you, will you, have you? These kind of questions, you're like, okay, I want to answer the question in the way that these questions have been asked. Next one, do you get along with your boss? So similar to the previous one, we're talking about a do you question, so present simple. And what else is in here? Get along, what is get along? Excellent, Robin. Yeah, phrasal verbs again. Why are phrasal verbs important? So everyone was saying natural speaking. Is there any part of the exam that grades you on using phrasal verbs? Maybe that's the vocabulary, exactly. So phrasal verb, what type of vocabulary is a phrasal verb? Anyone know what we call this? Robin, excellent. Yeah, idiomatic. So this is idiomatic language. But what is a phrasal verb? It's idiomatic language. So the two types of idiomatic language that you're going to be using, you can use idioms and you can use phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs are a lot more natural than idioms are. Native speakers don't use many idioms, but native speakers use a lot of phrasal verbs. If you don't use idiomatic language, what's going to happen to your score? What is your maximum score with 0 idiomatic language for your vocabulary? Robin said 6, exactly. Yeah, you can't get over about 6 for your vocabulary, even if you've got a really wide range. If you're not using some idiomatic language, then you can't get over about 6. So what is great about these questions? We've just got 2 questions here. Do you get enough time off and do you get along with your boss? What's really good about these 2 questions? We can repeat the phrasal verb. You don't have to sit there. Yeah, because otherwise, a lot of students go, oh, I find it very difficult to think, what is a phrasal verb when I'm giving my speaking? Well, the exam is actually providing you phrasal verbs to use. So rather than going, oh, do you get enough time off? No, I don't, because, use the phrasal verb given. No, I don't get enough time off. You're accurately using a phrasal verb. Do you get along well with your boss? Do you get along well with your colleagues? Yes, I get along well with my colleagues because, excellent. You demonstrated to the examiner, you can use idiomatic language. Now, the sky is the limit for your vocabulary score. If the rest of your vocabulary is good, you know that you can get the band 7s, the band 8s, the band 9s, because you're using this. Obviously, we want to use it more than just once, but this is really nice that it's in the exam. This final one says, do you think you'll be doing the same job in 10 years? What is this testing? Yeah, being able to make future predictions. So again, can you use a language to talk about future predictions? Does the examiner care if you're doing the same job in 10 years or not? No, absolutely no. They've probably turned off by that point. They've wanted to hear you using predictive vocabulary, maybe predictive tenses like you will, or I think I will. If you can start using hypothetical situations and use conditions here. So, if I'm doing the same job in 10 years, I hope it pays the same. Otherwise, and you can use these kind of expressions. So it's all about language. So stop thinking about it's about ideas. Analyze the question when you hear it. What's it asking me? Try and address that. So we have a couple of people here who are studying and they're not working. So let's have a look at these study questions. And then after that, I'm going to give everyone a chance to speak. Dory says part 1 is marked. How do you mean part 1 is marked? Do you mean does the examiner give you a grade for part 1? Okay, so that's a really good question. How do examiners mark your speaking test? So they don't actually give you a grade for each section. You don't have a grade for part 1, you don't have a grade for part 2, you don't have a grade for part 3. The examiner is giving you a grade for your band scores, and that's going to be affected by exactly, Robin, your overall performance. So you're going to start off in part 1, and the questions are going to be a lot easier. They're going to be about your personal experience, which is normally what people are much better at speaking about. And then it gets on to part 3, where you're talking about abstract comments, which is more difficult. The reason it gets more difficult is to see, can you get those high band scores? So you can demonstrate in part 1 that you can speak. You can probably get yourself up to a band 6 in part 1 and part 2. But part 3 is where they're really testing your language, giving you more difficult things to talk about. And that's going to see, can you get up to the band 7s? Can you get up to the band 8s? And can you get up to the band 9s? But for the time being, we're just going to look at these questions. So let's have a look at this study one. Why did you choose this subject? What tense is this testing? This always tricks students. Raymond, very excellent. Past tense. Yeah, why did you choose this subject? So don't answer this question. You might have it like, why did you choose this job? And a lot of students say, oh, I choose this job because, no, it's past. I chose this subject. I chose this job. They're really important that you're using the past. Yeah. The next one, how many hours per day do you spend studying? What is this testing? Rabin says the present. Why is it testing the present? You're correct. Why is it testing the present? What rule for the present test, present tense, does this test? So it's testing, well done, Duri. Yeah, it's testing habitual actions. You know, how many hours do you spend a day do you spend studying? So this is a habit every single day. What do you do every single day? Well, if you have a habitual action, we should be using the present simple, so you don't use the continuous. Yeah, I spend 8 hours a day studying. I don't do anything else. Studying is taking over my life. So something like this. Obviously, we then need to develop these ideas. Next one. Did you study more or less when you were a child? This is testing two things. Very exactly. Comparison would be a great past tense. Yeah. So it's asking you to talk in the past, but it's also asking you to make comparisons. Do you like your teachers? No. Thank you. Navina, present. Yeah, exactly. It's asking you present. It's a fact. Do you like them? Yes, I do. No, I don't. We're using present tense. How much longer will you be a student? What's this testing? Brilliant, Nabila. Yeah, future. So it's, can you talk about the future? Can you talk about using will? Duri was saying modal. So yeah, I guess we could be talking about possibility. That's definitely a way that you could answer that, Duri. Yeah. Okay. So now we know exactly what we should be thinking about. I'm going to go through these questions we've asked my students and see how they do. So let's start off with, how about Duri? Are you up for speaking?
Okay, sir.
Okay, so don't worry. Keep it simple. Try and focus on those things we've just mentioned. So at the beginning of the test, the examiner is going to say, do you work or are you a student?
I'm not working at the moment, but I'm not a student as well. For quite some time, I'm studying IELTS. Okay,
so in this instance, so I'm going to break this down as we go along, because I think it's going to be easier and more useful for you guys. So this very first question, do you work or are you a student? The only reason they're asking this question is to choose which group of questions they're going to ask. You don't actually need to develop this very much. So do you work or are you a student? Currently I work, and don't say I'm not working, I'm not a student. Just say, oh, I'm studying IELTS. So you are a student because you're studying IELTS. So you can just say, oh, I study IELTS at the moment. Okay. And for this one question, you only need one sentence, okay? And then the examiner is done, okay? So let me move on. So Turi, why did you choose this subject?
So I actually have to migrate to Canada. For that, I need to pass IELTS, and that is an English test. So I've chosen this one.
Very nice. So in this instance, Duri is, I have chosen. Even better. So what tense is Duri using?
Perfect. Present perfect.
So you're demonstrating a use of tenses. Make sure there is some kind of tense you're using which isn't past. So I have chosen is absolutely fine, or I chose is also good. Okay, next one. Duri, how many hours per day do you spend studying?
I usually spend an hour each day in order to continue my English studies.
Okay. Something I would recommend with all of these answers, try and give at least 2 extra pieces of information. So you directly answer the question and at least 2. So how many hours do you spend studying? I usually spend about an hour every day. What was the second thing you said?
So I said I usually spend an hour every day to continue my English preparation.
Okay, great. And maybe we could add a little bit more information. So I'd like to.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to spend more time, but I'm really busy with my house chores.
Excellent. So trying to, you can count it on your fingers. Answer 1 extra piece of information, 2 extra pieces of information. Once you've done that, you've sufficiently answered the question, and wait for the examiner to ask the next question. So did you study more or less when you were a child?
When I was a child, my only job was to study in school. So it was, most of my time was spent studying. Okay. And nowadays, my main job is a housewife, so I usually study less.
Okay, well done. And I guess a really nice language here we're using when I was a child. So we've got complex sentences here. So really nice use of language there. Good job. Do you like your teachers?
Definitely, I like my teachers when their explanation is understandable. But at times when I don't understand, I do have doubts and they are not clarified. So I am a bit, I don't like the teachers who don't explain well.
Okay, excellent. How much?
So, but there was a lot of hesitation in my answer. So how will this be graded? Like, I want to ask if I do that much of hesitation while answering. So how is it that seen?
So over 1 question is not going to change your score. Like if you hesitate throughout your test, that will bring your fluency and coherence down. That's going to depend for the whole 15 minutes of how much you hesitate. If there is occasional hesitation, you're probably looking at, and everything else is good, you're probably looking at a strong band 7 if it's occasional, possibly even a band 8, depending on how much you hesitate. Yeah, if it was just that question you hesitated and you didn't hesitate for the rest of the exam, you could still probably get yourself a band 8. But if you're consistently hesitating, it could bring you down to a 7, or even if it's really extreme hesitation, it could bring you down to about 6.
And intonation and everything else, like how was the answer length and everything?
Okay, answer length is good. What I'm focusing more on rather than intonation at the moment, I just want to focus on how we're actually answering the question. You are very easily understandable. Again, intonation over one question is too small of a sample size. I have to listen to you over the whole test, which is why examiners grade you over the whole test. Because what you will find, most students, they tend to have better intonation at the beginning of the test than the end, because at the end of the test, they're being asked very difficult questions. So when you're being asked difficult questions, you start thinking more about the questions than you do about your pronunciation. And you'll find that that's where that goes wrong. But today we're not focusing on the pronunciation. For that question, you were fine. So let's move on to the very last question. How much longer will you be a student?
I might study IELTS as long as I don't get my required score. So it may take another month or so.
Okay, so here at the moment, I'm still saying, I would say probably you're giving your answer and you're kind of giving one extra piece of information. So I would like to see 2 extra pieces of information to make sure that your answer is fully developed.
Okay, so how should I answer that one?
So how much longer will you be a student? So you say, I'm planning on taking my test in a month or so. So I will study as long as I need to take the test. And then after that, maybe I will study a different subject, but I don't plan on taking any more IELTS after I've studied after I've passed my exam.
Okay.
An extra piece of information.
Thank you.
So let's move on to, let's go with Rebin. So Rebin, do you work or are you?
Yes, sir.
Do you work or are you a student, Rebin?
I work. I'm an audiologist.
Okay, and how long have you been doing this job?
It's been about 8 years. I established my own clinic and yeah, I like it.
Okay, so we've definitely got some tenses here. I would like to see, especially if you've got something like a present perfect question, sorry, a present perfect continuous, that we've got this been doing, try and replicate the tenses. So I've been doing this job for blah, blah,
I've been
blah.
working as an audiologist for 8 years.
Excellent. So you're demonstrating to the examiner that you can use this tense. If you don't use the tense that's given to you, the examiner is going to think you can't use the tense. So it's really important to try and use tenses when you get given these more complicated tenses, take the advantage and replicate them. So the information in your answer is great, Rebin, but just make sure you're replicating those tenses. Okay, let's look at the next one. So what is the most challenging part of your job?
Finding a way to communicate with my patients. They are reticent. They cannot speak clearly, and communicating with them is really challenging.
Okay, good. So stating facts, we're using present simple. Again, we have an opportunity here to use superlatives. So you mentioned communicating with them is very challenging, but trying to use a superlative. So I think communicating with them is the most challenging part of my job. Yeah, using that, or the most difficult, you could maybe paraphrase challenging to be that I think the most difficult part of my job is communicating with them. So trying to use as many of the things that they're asking you about in the question is really going to benefit. The vocabulary you're using is excellent, by the way. Everything was very accurate. But like I said, just trying to get into your head, what's the question asking? We mentioned this, superlatives and present tense. So try, if possible, try and use that. Next one. Do you get enough time off?
No, it's been about, I get enough time. I get time off just for 30 minutes during the day. And I think it's not enough. I work for more than 10 to 12 hours and I get bored. I really bored. It's not sufficient.
Okay, brilliant. Well done. You're using the phrasal verbs. Well developed answer. Great job. Next one. Do you get along well with your boss?
I don't have any boss. I can say I'm my own boss, and I cannot answer the question correctly to say whether I get along with someone else good or bad.
Okay, so here, remember, if you're going to say get along with someone, you don't say get along good. It's get along well, because get along is a verb. So you want to be using adverbs, not adjectives. So I get along well, or I get along poorly. In this instance, like you were saying, okay, so you're your own boss. Don't say I can't answer the question. You know, you can use it almost a bit of humor. You're like, oh, I don't have a boss. I am my own boss. So I think I get along with myself very well. So you've still got the opportunity to use this get along. Again, there's a phrasal verb there. Use the opportunity. And yeah, or as you said, you could just be honest. You know, I don't have a boss to get along with. So,
Okay.
okay. Something also I wanted to point out with all of these questions. So when the answer is negative, I know a lot of cultures like to say yes. You know, it's part of the culture. They don't like to say no. You're in an exam. You don't like to say no. This is an English exam. Using negative forms of verbs is part of English. You know, something someone could say, oh, do you like sport? No, I don't. Don't worry about saying anything negative. Just be honest. Remember, it's a speaking exam. You're not getting marks like, oh, you're your own boss. You didn't answer this question. That's not how it works. They're testing your ability to speak. So if someone said this to you in a coffee shop, how would you reply? So always keep that in mind. Don't panic. We're like, oh, I'm going to give a negative answer. Negative answers are fine. Okay, and last question, Reben. Do you think you'll be doing the same job in 10 years?
Yeah, I'm sure I will be working in the next 10 years as an audiologist, because I can make a living by working as an audiologist. I like it.
Okay, great. Well done. Excellent job. We're addressing the future tense here. Something I would say, if at all possible, because it's your speaking, and speaking is a bit more informal, try and contract. So I can say I will be doing this. So I can say I'll be doing this. So contractions are something, you know, they're higher level phonological features. These are the kind of things you need to do to make sure that you're getting the higher sevens or the band eights. You need to be contracting your language. Okay.
Great.
Thank you very much, Robin. Moving on to Nabila. Do you work or are you a student?
I'm a student.
Okay, so Nabila, why did you choose the subject you study?
I chose to study IELTS because I would like to take another exam, which is CELTA, and the requirement is to get a 7 in IELTS.
Okay, excellent. Again, what I was saying to Reben, just remember, contract where possible. So I would like to do this exam. So if possible, I'd like to do this exam. So whenever we can contract, try and contract, especially for stronger students like yourself, because that's going to really, you know, it helps with connected speech. It makes you sound a little more native.
Okay.
Okay, next one. How many hours per day do you spend studying?
Well, I spend long hours because I have to attend classes, and then I try to work on the 4 areas that the exam requires. So I try to do listening or reading or some of writing, and along with attending classes.
Okay. So if someone says how many hours, you say I spend long hours. So long doesn't really answer how many. So you want more, I spent a lot of hours rather than hours. Okay. Because if you said long hour, an hour can't really be long if you think about it. An hour is 60 minutes. You can't have a 70-minute hour because it wouldn't be an hour. So a lot of hours if you hear this how many. Okay. Apart from that, really good. Very well developed as well. So great job there. Did you study more or less when you were a child?
When I was a child, I think I studied less because I spent more hours at school, but I think the subjects or things were less heavy as studying for IELTS.
Okay, good job. Well developed. We're using these this complex sentence structure of, when I was a child. So very nice. Do you like your teachers?
Yes, I do. I really like my teachers, and they motivate me to go on studying English, and I'd like to be as professional as they are in the language teaching.
Okay, brilliant. And this time you are using those contractions, so great job. And finally, how much longer will you be a student?
Well, I'm planning to go on studying, so I think I'll be a student for at least 1 year more, because when I finish IELTS, I would like to take the other course and of course the exam. So I think I have a long way being a student.
Okay. Again, contractions. I would like. So I'd like. So, it's one of those words that students really miss out on contractions with is would. So trying to get the I'd like. So that'd be really good to make sure that your connected speech is going to be improved then. And again, it's something that examiners look out for your pronunciation, for the higher level scores if you're wanting to go up to the band 8s. So, okay, we've covered everyone. We've gone a little bit over time. I hope today you're able to see what I'm trying to get at. When you hear a question, and especially these common questions. So, have a look at the recording of this. Make sure you know these questions, whether you're studying or whether you're working. These are likely to come up. So don't, you want to have, I don't want to say like memorize answers, but you want to be ready for them, and you want to understand what the examiner is asking for. So if you hear phrasal verbs, be like, oh, I have an opportunity to use a phrasal verb. If you hear a special verb tense, use that verb tense. That's what they're testing you. They don't care about how long you've done a job. They don't care if you had enough time off. They want to hear you using language. It's a language exam. Once you change your attitude, like change your mindset about what the speaking exam is asking you about, you're going to find that you give really good answers and get really good scores. So thank you for everyone who came along today. I hope you found that useful. Just a reminder, there are weekly lessons with Barry. He does hour-long lessons every Monday, 1 o'clock UK time, where you get lots of opportunities to speak. He goes over all the different areas. So check him out on Mondays. Good luck to you all in your studies. If you found this helpful.
Sir, we will have another class 20 minutes later, yeah?
Yeah, and we will have another class in 20 minutes. I'll be doing the writing class in 20 minutes. Okay.
Okay, great.
Anyone watching this at home, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. And good luck to you all in your studies.